Very unusually, we're ahead of schedule, which is quite amazing. Please take a seat. So this panel is very exciting. It's entitled Democracy by Design, How to Ensure Responsible Tech and AI Innovation. And we have a wonderful panel here. First of all, Dubravka, Šuica, who is the Vice President of the European Commission for Democracy and Demography. We have Teresa Hutson, who is the Corporate Vice President for Technology and Corporate Responsibility at Microsoft. And we have Maydell, who is a member of the European Parliament. And if I'm a betting man, I would say probably the next European Commissioner from Bulgaria, although she's probably not going to confirm or deny that today on the stage. But if you read Politico, you would probably know that that's our bets are on her, and an old friend. Great to have you here. Thank you. I'm very pleased. I'm Jamil Anderlini, Editor-in-Chief of Politico, based in Brussels. And I'm very pleased to be providing gender diversity on a technology panel today. Just to remind you as well, you're very welcome to send in your questions. I've got the iPad in front of me, so you're very welcome to join in. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Vice President, I want to start with you. What is the European Commission worried about when it comes to AI and other emerging technologies at the moment? What worries you? What keeps you up at night?
First of all, you know what? There is a completely new portfolio, which is democracy and demography. And the first sign that we are worried is that we established a new portfolio, which is dealing with demography and democracy. We are, in fact, worried about foreign interference, about fake news, about disinformation, and this is the reason why we are enacting all these new rules which have to deal with artificial intelligence. We are now preparing defense democracy package, as you might know, which will be out on 7th of June. And it will, me and Madam Jourova, so it will be dealing with this disinformation, how to defend our democracy. It's unbelievable to hear today that we have to defend our democracy, but this is what it is at stake. So we have to defend our democracy, we have to make it resilient, and we have to make it fit for the future. And this is to answer your question on artificial intelligence. Of course, we are using it, we will be using it, but with the rules. Otherwise, it can become dangerous. So artificial intelligence is helpful. It can't replace humans, but it can help humans to be better in defending our democracy. And this is what we are trying to do with this Defense of Democracy package. It's also about free elections. It's about free media. It's about how to make our elections more transparent, how to make more Europeans to come to elections. We want to have better turnout in order to make our Europe more cohesive, especially nowadays when we know what's going on our borders.
So three of us here live in Brussels, and I have heard Brussels sneeringly referred to as the Silicon Valley of regulation. It is a fact that Europe has been potentially much more innovative when it comes to regulating technology than it has been in fostering technology champions. So do you agree, Teresa? And would you say that there is too much regulation in the European Union, and how do you get that balance right?
Well, I feel really lucky to work for a technology company that isn't in Silicon Valley. So perhaps not the best person to judge whether Brussels is the Silicon Valley of regulation. You know, I do think we need regulation. We need regulation on this emerging technology. When I think about the places I hope regulation goes, particularly as this technology emerges, I hope it's to the places, it's the sort of the risky cases, the risky ways that the technology can be used. Some of the things you talked about, the things that threaten democracy, a lot of this technology is actually going to solve some pretty boring problems. And I hope that the regulation doesn't kind of get in the way of some of the boring uses, but instead is really focused at, it may be two things. One, at the higher risk scenarios and uses, and really focuses on the outcome of the technology rather than sort of how the technology is built. That feels like the right place for regulators to operate.
Eva, I know you work on this all the time in the European Parliament, and I know this is something that you care deeply about. How do you get that balance right between fostering innovation, trying to come up with the next big European technology company, and making sure that we're looking after people's data and the things that Europe is maybe slightly better at?
Well, it becomes ever more challenging, right? Why? Because I am a tech optimist, but ever more so, I'm also a tech realist. I think it's very important to see the benefits the technology brings, but it's ever more important to talk today in settings similar as this one about the perils of technology and about how we can prepare society for the fast pace of technology and the way it moves. So my first and foremost concern for us as legislators is to make sure that we could find a good balance where we can support innovation happening in Europe, but in the same time do it according to our values. This is where, this democracy by design can play itself out in a way. However, it's about finding the balance. We cannot just be the referee. We need to make sure we are also the players. And this is, where we have seen difficulties over the past couple of years. You've mentioned data. Have we harnessed all the potential of data that is out there? Can we do more? So I think these are questions that we need to very carefully consider if we are to make sure that Europe could be that player in the game as well. I recently gave an interview and I said this is what keeps me up at night because finding that balance right, it's not easy, and it requires, I think, a conversation that goes beyond our bubble conversation. It requires a conversation that includes our international partners. One could call them an alliance of democracies. It's not just about proposing a piece of legislation. There are other components that all need to fit in the puzzle to make this conversation more successful if it's about regulation, to make institutions more credible, or to make sure that citizens will feel secure, protected, and also at ease using technologies. But I can elaborate further on what are those other components.
If I may continue this, because Eva, you mentioned citizens. You know that we had organized a conference on the future of Europe and that we have results and so on. And there are a follow-up of this conference on the future of Europe were different citizens panels. And we organized one citizen panel on digital world and metaverse. And this was, citizens were randomly selected from whole Europe. And what they asked is exactly this. They want to be safe and secure in this world. And they are worried and they are concerned about this. And this is why we wanted to listen to them before we start drafting this new legislation on digital world and the metaverse. So especially youngsters were, although we had also the youngsters from 16 to 24 years old there, 1/3 of those people were that young, because we are talking about future. When I say we want to make our democracy be fit for the future, that means that we have to discuss this with them. And they were concerned, so they want to be safe, and they were concerned about how we handle this data. And I think our legislation will deal with this and we have to solve this because it can become dangerous at one point.
So when you I talk to the technology companies, particularly the ones in Silicon Valley, what they often argue, you hear the head of Meta talking about this sometimes, they argue that technology companies should not be, the big ones should not be broken up, they should not be too regulated, because that will hurt them and would cede the advantage to autocratic adversaries like China. It's an argument have heard quite a lot in the last couple of years. So do you buy that as an argument, that maybe we should go a little lighter on the American technology companies because we want democracies to win the technological race and not autocracies like China?
Of course, everything is about democracy nowadays, knowing that only 30% of the world population lives in democracy. So this is something we have really to deal with. But of course, we don't want technology to be on top of all this. But at the same time, we need help of technology to deal with all these issues. And I can argue with both big tech companies, but also with citizens who feel unsafe.
What do you think, Eva? So do you buy this argument? Oh, don't regulate us. I mean, it seems quite self-serving.
To be clear, I didn't make that argument.
No, you didn't make that argument. We're talking about Zuckerberg.
Other.
So, Mark Zuckerberg. But do you buy this? Like, oh, don't regulate me. Don't split up my company, which is like the greatest monopoly since Standard Oil, because I have to save Western democracy. Whereas then there are others who are claiming, Mark Zuckerberg, you're the worst things. Surveillance capitalism is pure evil. These are ongoing arguments, and they're very interesting arguments for me. So where do you fall?
Well, it's a little bit of a discussion that I think has already taken place, because when you look at regulation, we already have worked on the DMA, we have worked on the DSA, we are working on other pieces of regulation that is already on the table, and it has happened. And I think when we speak about defending democracy, it is very much up to the politicians to be the ones defending democracy and to be out there making those important alliances, particularly in the tech arena, in making sure that we develop technology according to our values, to make sure we pair with those other countries. It is one thing is about competition, and it's another thing about making sure that these important technologies are developed within Europe, within the US, that we work together, whether it's a G7 format, whether we bring other allies around us to support us. And this is the other piece. One thing could be regulation, but this important international cooperation on tech has to happen at an accelerated speed with much more clear priorities and aims, and it has to happen fast. And this is where I'm not sure I'm seeing this happening.
How do you do that? I'll get to you in a second, because this is one of the questions I really wanted to talk to you about. Liz Truss yesterday talked about an economic NATO. What about a technological NATO? Is that what you're proposing? Or how do you do this? Because transatlantically, it's a competition. It's not coordinated.
Well, I would much rather
right?
compete with the US rather than compete alone with China. So it's better if we compete among each other, but we know who is our actual enemy. Europe's enemy, I don't think, is the US, and I don't think US enemy is the EU. I believe we need to, be very clear when it comes to tech. Who are we competing? And it is those autocratic. It is those. It is those autocratic states that we need to be aware, and we need to be able to have an open conversation, particularly when it comes to tech. One idea that I put forward, and this could be a good vehicle, it's to have a tech-wise council, a transatlantic or a democratic tech-wise council, where you do not just have, policymakers and institutions and companies, but also bring society, civil society, academia, anthropologists, others, to discuss, debate, and see What is the next big thing that's coming? Are we prepared? How can we prepare society? And I think private sector has a big role to play in that. I think, you know, we need to have some sort of a social contract with society, and we are all part of this, because the way things accelerate, we are definitely not prepared. Institutions have to be better prepared. We need to think about this very, very carefully, and we need to think about it now. I don't think we have the time to think about that when a major issue comes on a table. I don't want to use a more strong word than an issue, but we could all think of different scenarios that could potentially harm democracy. And some of them are happening maybe on a smaller scale, sometimes bigger scale, but it's time for us to have that conversation. You know, I mean, it could start at G7 this week. You know, it has to have a starting point, and it doesn't have to just be convened once. We need to have some sort of convening power for this conversation to happen. But apart from just being a conversation, it has to have few concrete deliverables. So all those people that are, you know, part of the conversation, they need to clearly say what solutions, what do we propose. It has to have some deliverables. It cannot be just the talk.
Of course, we have the Trade and Technology Council between the US and Europe. It's the latest name and a thing that's been going for a long time. What do you think, coming from the private sector? Yeah. I mean, from a company's perspective, that might be like your worst nightmare. All the regulators in America getting together with all the regulators in Brussels and coming up with a single regulation that is...
So I think part of the issue is that we are sort of talking about these as separate silos. And we're actually talking about a societal problem. So we need to actually bring the conversation together with regulators, transatlantic regulators, with industry, and with civil society and citizens. I mean, citizens are the participants in the democracy, and so we actually need to make sure that they're in the conversation. And I think part of if we think back to what hasn't gone so well with technology, it's because we aren't bringing everybody into the conversation to solve the problem together, address the problem together, figure out, you know, which parts kind of have responsibility for moving the societal interests together forward.
How does Microsoft respond when countries like China are always constantly trying to co-opt you, weaponize your products in the service of autocracy? Because Microsoft has a huge presence in China through various parts of the company. But how do you respond to that?
You know, it's an ongoing challenge. We've never really thought that we do better for the world by not being in a place, that we can kind of extend protection to the world by being there. But we are really careful about what we do in the places we are in. And that's, you know, everything from where we store data to what sort of services we offer in a particular place. And so that is an ongoing conversation kind of in any place where we decide to do business. And of course is an ongoing conversation in China.
And what companies always say is, we follow the laws in every country we follow. Like Elon Musk is now saying that he is not...
I'm being painted with a very broad brush here.
I'm not comparing. I may be giving you... I'm helping you by comparing you to like the worst.
Thank you.
Elon Musk, the free speech absolutist, who is now, well, but you know, there are exceptions. More fundamentally, do you even think it is the role, and I want to ask this of all of you, do you even think it is the role of the private sector to support democracy? I mean, this is a much bigger question than just technology, but it's something that I'm fascinated by. It's obviously in the business interest of Politico to support democracy and free speech. That's our business model.
Yep.
That's our.
Yep.
There's no contradiction whatsoever. But for other companies, I would say, particularly in technology, where you are running ahead of regulation, and then regulation is trying to catch up, and maybe regulation is formed very fast, and not necessarily thinking through all the implications. I mean, is it really in your job, let's say?
I'd say a couple things. I mean, one, it's the quote, sort of like democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other ones. So I think there's partly, you know, democracy is, even the chaos of democracy is better because the chaos of democracy does have the rule of law. Business thrives under the rule of law. It's predictable. It's good for business when you know what the law is. The other part, just from a pure business perspective, democracy is good for our business. About, I think, 95% of our business comes from democracies. So it actually is in our business interest to promote and support and advance democracy.
I think that everyone has a role in this. Also, private sector, be it SMEs or medium or big companies, everybody has a role in this technological race. But what we haven't said when we were talking about citizens, citizens should be involved. But if citizens are not educated well, if they don't know anything about how to use all these digitals, what are we going to do? This is the reason why we are promoting this lifelong learning, because without lifelong learning and without this, we wouldn't be able to follow. So or maybe some youngsters, but people medium age or older people won't be able to cope with this. And this is big societal problem. So we have to deal with this, and this is what we are trying to do, knowing that Europe and the world, but Europe is aging. So knowing that we live 10 years more on average in the last 50 years. So how are these older people be able to cope with all this technology, with artificial intelligence, with robotics? I said at the beginning, I don't think that artificial intelligence can replace humans, but at the same time, it can assist, it can help a lot. So how are we going to cope with the education systems? This is something this is much deeper than only technology, technological race and innovations. It's much deeper, and we have to, I would say it's a vicious circle, how to deal with all this. And I think everybody is responsible in defending and in making our democracy be resilient and making it really fit for the future. How to keep it, because nowadays, nothing is business as usual, as you see. Whole world is somehow in turbulence, and we have to be prepared for this, and we are not prepared. And this is what we have to push on local, regional, national levels, at all levels in Europe, but also beyond.
Let me push you a little bit, because you say that it doesn't have to replace humans, but even the most, I've been in so many conversations the last 6 months about ChatGPT, and suddenly it's coming from my industry now and my journalists and editors, and they're all worried about it, and we're all talking about it. And in the many conversations I've had, even the most optimistic, the biggest proponents of AI and generative AI, they say, yes, it's going to replace a lot of jobs, like journalists and editors. And so, isn't it just a fact that many, many jobs are going to be replaced?
I'm sure that it will replace, but again, GPT depends on human input. So you can't create anything without having input there. But for us in Europe, it's good, because we know that there are big shortages in labor market. We badly need to fill in all these vacancies. So for Europe, it will be good, but again, it should be somehow governed by human brains. And this is something which, that we lack a lot of people in labor market for different, not only for new green and digital jobs, but also for the caregivers job, for different jobs, for old crafts. So this is the reason why we pronounce this year European Year of Skills, because we see that we are lacking skills, and we have to somehow try to find the people who can fill our labor market and who can be fit for European industry and for European societies. And then we come, this is not the topic, but we come to legal migrations, but I don't want to
let's not open that.
Don't start this topic.
Peel back the layers on that particularly eye-watering little onion.
Yes, okay.
Eva, you're working on the AI Act right now. And what do you see as the main obstacles, the main challenges that you have to deal with? Because the technology is far ahead of where the legislation is, or where the legislators, I'm sure you understand it, but I also know for a fact that many of your colleagues in the European Parliament who will be working on this have no idea about this.
Well, so just first of all, to recap for the audience, the AI Act was proposed a couple of years ago, and we were not planning to address foundational models at all within the AI Act. However, since a couple of weeks, there was a political will to do that. For me, it's important not to legislate the next big thing. because today is ChatGPT, tomorrow's something else. So I believe we have put forward a draft text which basically provides some sort of guidelines, guardrails to make sure that we legislate, the basis of technology, because it could be, as I said, one company name today, tomorrow will be something else. We had a very clear way of how we see the AI Act operating through dividing the different risk factors. So should your model that you're working on falls under the high-risk AI sector and part, and should it be a foundational model, it will have to go through certain checks and balances. So I think we found for the time being a good way that could possibly stand, the test of time for the time being. And I'm glad we've worked in a very cooperative way in the European Parliament. I also have to say that I believe that compared to a couple of years ago, policymakers have been brought up to speed in making sure they understand better and faster those developments. Where I think we need to work more, and I think the next panel might address a little bit of those concerns, is to make sure we have prepared public administration across states. People that are able to use technology to optimize their work, to perform better, and also to make better decisions. I think this is where we will need to have a deeper conversation and find ways on how to prepare those public administrations for what is happening today, and how it can help their work.
Would you, I'm subject to GDPR, and I have a situation where my chief data officer is based in Washington, cannot access any data in Politico in Europe because of GDPR regulations. Our lawyers say, no, you can't do that. In places like China or Europe, or China or Russia or other autocratic regimes, there is no such thing as privacy, really. They can access everyone's data at all times, and government programs to develop AI, which we know thrives on vast amounts of data, they're able to just scrape everything and use that to build these models. Doesn't that give us a big disadvantage in the West, in Europe?
Well, this is why I said we need to act fast, and we need to be very, very strategic and targeted. We need to answer the question, what is it that we want to achieve? It's one thing proposing different legislation. It's about making sense of all the legislation and what is your ultimate goal. And this is why it is more than ever that we need to be working with those democratic allies that we have. There's an important summit, I think, happening today between the EU and India on tech, particularly. I think we need to be bringing on board some of those countries that sometimes could be described. A friend of mine, Jared Cohen, released a paper yesterday. He describes them as the swing states. That one day feel more comfortable cooperating with, with China, and another day feel more comfortable cooperating with France, for example. So we need to see how to make sure we bring those countries closer to our goals and to our values. However, we need to be cautious not to make the same mistake we've made before. We've tried to cooperate with China thinking we'll bring them closer to our values. We did the same with Russia. So I think we cannot be any more naive, but we need to be urgently strategic.
So I want to ask all of you, but starting with you, Teresa, who's winning when it comes to AI technology? Who do you think it's China, the US, probably not Europe, unfortunately, but in leading in these the most important technologies today?
Yeah, I would say, and I'm sort of echoing Eric Schmidt, I would say the US is ahead right now. It is helpful to have several companies working on it that works to our benefit. But I also think that if we want to stay ahead, if the Western world wants to stay ahead, we have to keep going. A pause is, China probably won't pause.
And in China, if I remember, when I used to cover this 15 years ago, in China, Baidu is like the national champion for AI, but their product is iffy.
And the Beijing Institute for AI is also there. But yeah, so there are so many pieces of this. There's the compute power. There's the large language model training. There's the application level layer. So all of those things need to continue. We need to continue to innovate across all of those layers of the stack. But they're keeping the pressure on.
What's your sense? Do you think the West is winning or America's winning? And what does that mean for Europe? What does that mean?
Hard to say for me that America is winning, but I think transatlantic relation is very important. And we are really maintaining this transatlantic relation. And it's very important who is in power in the States. I mean, this is political, but just to let you know. So I think that we are rivals, but at the same time, we are working together and we support each other. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to oppose to China. So I think that China won't win in the end because of this autocratic system, although they have access to data, but I don't think this is not enough. So I think Europe, in cooperation with the States, will win. Not only Europe, not only States, but also I'm talking about Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada, so all Western world.
It's so nice of you to include New Zealand, little New Zealand, where I grew up. Thank you. Eva, what do you think? Who's winning?
It's important that important that democracy wins. And it can only do so by us understanding that cooperation and collaboration is more important than ever today. It's the definition of madness to be doing the same thing all over again and expect a different result, as I said. So today I think we need to be very awake in understanding today's and tomorrow's realities. So in order for democracy to win, we need those alliances up and running and kicking and, having a strategy. That would be my take on that.
And it's my prerogative as the moderator. I'm allowed to step in with my little opinion. And what I would say is that when it comes to China specifically, while we are maybe in Europe, we may be held back slightly by the limited access to large amounts of data, or the controlled access to large amounts of data. In China, they are held back by the autocratic imperative. For the Communist Party of China, the thing they care about the most, that they're worried about the most, is that a chatbot will start talking about Winnie the Pooh or about Uyghurs in concentration camps in Xinjiang, or we'll start to say, well, maybe it's a good idea to overthrow the Communist Party. So actually the constraints...
That escalated.
Actually, the constraints that they have on technology are actually, I would say, almost greater than what we've done with legislation. So that's my personal opinion. But so we've talked quite a lot about Europe since we're in Europe, and we have people from European government here. What is the legislation that you are following the closest in the US, in Washington or in California? And what is it legislatively or political developments that are the most concerning for you or interesting for you, say?
I would actually say this is a place where the US is behind. We don't have privacy legislation, and we need privacy legislation. So we keep an eye on that. Really, trying to figure out how do we get a government that can work together to step in so that there are guardrails on innovation and technology, so that we're making sure that it supports citizens and people and democracy and the values that we've talked about here, but that certainly I as a person, but also it helps to work at a company that also believes in that. And so I think we would like to see the biggest challenge, I think, is figuring out how we can get our, largely our federal government to step in and, pass some laws that address some of this. So we keep a close eye on that.
You've talked about ordinary citizens a fair bit, but what can ordinary citizens really do when it comes to legislation in the European Union around technology? I mean, you're right, we need people to have higher levels of skills and understanding, but how can they actually affect this? Are you calling for them to vote in the election next year, or what else? What else can they do besides that?
They can do a lot. This is what I said at the beginning when I mentioned Conference on the Future of Europe. We invited citizens from different strates of society by randomly selection, and they were deliberating on this. Then later on, we organized citizens panels on this, and citizens were vocal about this topic. They were interested in digital world and metaverse because it's something which is a little bit unknown to them, and they wanted to clarify all this. And we are always organizing such panels, not only at European level, but also we call to organize panels at national, regional, and local level in order to incorporate citizens, to make them feel that they can draft European policy. We want citizens to see that they can be participants, not only via their elected representatives, but they are the ones who can do it. We also have a one-stop shop, which is called Have Your Say. They can come there and tell their ideas, and we accept ideas or we don't. It depends on what is this about. So there is a big ongoing process which is called deliberative democracy. We want citizens to be on board because we live in totally unprecedented times, and we cannot do policy anymore as business as usual, as I said at the beginning. We have to listen to citizens and to see what are their ideas, and you can't wait for the next 4 or 5 years campaign in order to inform them. You have to keep citizens informed all the time, and this is what European Commission is doing all the time, trying to make this standard, but it's not an easy task, I must tell you.
For Eva and for Teresa in particular, ChatGPT just sort of popped up, and it was a thing that was like kind of took the world by storm. And everyone, my son who's at university in Toronto is like, Dad, I just turned in a paper written by ChatGPT and I got a B+ or something. And I was like, no, please don't do that. And I shouldn't have said which university. God damn. But the point is that has obviously made a lot of headlines, but when I talk to the chief technology officer in my company and other companies, they're like, yeah, but it's been going on. Do you know that this is already, so is there a lot of hype around this? Do we think, you've said the flavor of the month, we shouldn't regulate for the flavor of the month. Do we think that there's too much being put into this latest innovation, or is it genuinely a revolution? I'm interested to know your perspective and yours.
So, we have been working on, how do we make responsible AI decisions for, it's like 8 years at Microsoft. So AI has been around for a long time. I mean, when you use, like autocomplete on your phone, that's AI. So AI is around and has been around. And, I do think that because of that, we've been thinking about it for a long time and, building responsible AI principles, building that into our engineering process. But I think this is a significant moment in time because the large language models, the foundational models are different, and because so many people are aware of them. And because of that, we have to really address some of the potential, the things people are worried about, the things that scare people about what the technology can do. Making sure that we're listening to that, making sure that we're designing that in and mitigating the harm where we can.
I realize we've run out of time, but hype or
well,
not?
Very briefly, citizens have been using, whether they know it or they don't know it, AI for quite some time. However, it's maybe the first time now that there is a hype, but I also think it's a hype that it's a reasonable hype, because it's AI that has different features. It can do different things. It's trained in a different way. And this is why I think it's a time when we have to pay attention, and we need to understand, both from an institutional perspective, but also in society as a whole, that this sort of hypes might come way faster and way sooner than we would have thought they will come. And this is where, as democracies, we need to be not just prepared, but we need to see how societies will thrive in this very new environment.
What a great way to end. Thank you very much. I need to mention that the Alliance of Democracies is co-hosting a workshop in partnership with the Alfred Herrhausen Society later today to go more in depth on this topic of democracy by design, and they will be testing a toolkit on this, so I just wanted to mention that, and I want to thank all of you. Wonderful. Thanks so much for the discussion.
Thank you.
Great to have you.